Welcome to the latest version. I'm your host, Betsy Bush. My guest today is Rob Miss, whose long career as a nonprofit consultant has thrived along with his work as a poet. He's also a passionate advocate for encouraging the creation of art by the developmentally disabled. We're going to have a fascinating conversation. Rob, thank you so much for being on the latest version. You've had a long career as a consultant to nonprofit boards of directors. But along with that, you've had some really fascinating, I don't even want to call them side gigs, because the poetry that you've been writing has run alongside your career. But also I want to talk, eventually about your advocacy for the developmentally disabled and giving them the artistic tools they need to create. And I find that such an interesting field. So tell me a little bit about your career as a nonprofit consultant and the sort of work you've been doing there.
Sure. I've worked in the nonprofit field most of my adult life, actually. At the University of North Carolina, I help people start media companies, and of course I worked in public television during that period for 15 years. At the University of North Carolina owned the licenses to a statewide TV network, and I actually ran that the last 5 years I was there. It's very exciting, and we were talking before we came on about time in doing programs, timing, et cetera. And I just want to tell you quickly, I interviewed Miss North Carolina. I had a program called North Carolina People. And about 20 minutes in, we kind of ran out of material. I didn't know what to do. And so I asked her about her religion. And we had a long discussion after that. So, you have to just be flexible and do your best to kind of fill out the time if it kind of runs dry on you.
Right.
Anyway, I went from there back to New York. And on the way, I stopped in Washington, D.C. and was editor of what was then known as the Association of Association of Public Relations in Colleges and Universities. So that was also a nonprofit. And then when I got back to New York, I ended up as vice president for development and fundraising for a large organization, which is now called HeartShare Human Services in Brooklyn. And from there, I became a consultant in New Jersey with a small firm. And I met this woman named Gay Savino, who also lived in Westchester, and we decided to go into business for ourselves. So for 12 years, she and I were consultants to nonprofits in New York and New Jersey primarily, and up in the Boston area too. And then she left the business and became an advocate for aging in place and things like that. We left amicably, but then I really got deeply involved with working with boards of directors.
Perhaps my listener isn't familiar with the role that the board of directors plays at an organization, the library or the social service agency down the street, or all the different sorts of nonprofits that exist in a community. Why is a board of directors important, and why is it so crucial that they get on the right track, or they get consulting from someone like you?
Well, it starts out legally. In fact, when I do board retreats, one of the first things I tell the board is, you are responsible for a corporation. You are the directors of a bona fide corporation, and that has legal responsibilities. And sometimes that really shocks them
Mm-hmm.
because very often in nonprofit field, some people want to go on the board because they're well intentioned, but they don't really understand the gravity of what they're getting into. So that's really basic. And the other side of this is that the board is where the action is. It has to do with setting policy and seeing how, or monitoring how that policy is carried out. So that's to me what makes it really important, and why it became important for me to work with boards. And also I enjoy it. I like to mix it up with people.
Mm-hmm.
And my partner and I, before she left the business, had started what we call board workshops, and we did it actually to get business, because if you do a training with the board, they will ask you to come back and do other things. That was our policy. But then I got more and more involved, and I really liked it. So when I went out on my own after that, I just concentrated on that, and I had a great time. It was really wonderful. So I still keep the door open for this, but I'm kind of semi-retired now and gotten involved with, as you mentioned, poetry and grandkids, of course.
Of course. Can you think of an example of a board that did a turnaround or had entered a new phase because of some of the consulting or some of the counsel you were able to give them? Can you think of a time when someone turned it around, or when a board was in trouble, or how might a board benefit from someone like you coming in?
Well, I have to tell you, I've worked with over 100 boards, so I'd have to think about that. I think one of the things that I've experienced is 6 months or a year after I've worked with a board, a training, a retreat, whatever you want to call it, I've had people come up to me and thank me because it created a permanent change. In terms of specifics, I'm really reluctant to talk about clients, but I have seen this happen over and over again, I have to say. It mostly is going back, to use a sports reference, Vince Lombardi was a great coach, and he always emphasized the basics. And what I've found is emphasizing the basics on what board governance is all about really opens people's eyes. And I think that's been the main way that I've worked with boards, is to point out what's really important and what the basic responsibilities are, and then look at how that can be carried out. And that's where you get into what you're referring to. One of the ways that happens is that when you get a group of people together and you get them engaged, they start thinking outside the box. It's just a natural thing. The most recent one, I guess, is I worked with a group in New Rochelle, that it's a foundation for one of the schools. And all of a sudden, during this conversation, people bring in solutions to things that no one had thought about before because they weren't that engaged. And that's where you start to see change happening when you're working with an engaged board. And engagement is really the key. I find that a lot of nonprofit staff, and senior staff in particular, begin to see like a real crisis of conflict at times. And it does happen, of course, but if the board is engaged and staff are involved in that engagement as much as possible, the best results come out of that. I've always, one of the examples, I guess, is this is some years ago. I was working with a group that dealt with challenge in the mental health area. And I insisted that some of the clients be part of the conversation when we did a board retreat. And those folks came out with some of the best ideas, and it opened people's minds. That was a significant change that I could refer to.
That's so interesting. And that sounds like a lot of where we're going to be heading to when we talk about art and the creation of art among the developmentally disabled, which is something you've been championing for a few years. Why don't you tell me about that? I see
Sure.
on the Arc of Westchester site, ARC, which is I guess they have chapters all over the country. ARC.
That's right. That's a national brand now.
Right. They have in Westchester, and it's visible on the website, Arc Westchester, the gallery, there are artworks, paintings by clients of Arc of Westchester. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how you got involved?
Sure. Well, I had Arc Westchester as a client for 15 years. So I got to know them very well. In fact, I got to know the now retired executive director, Rick Swarat. He and I really became friends, but we kind of kept a professional distance in terms of how I did that work. So he always had in the original headquarters, which was in White Plains, he always had a picture of a piece of art and a little biography of the person. And that went on for years. But he built a new building, which is not so new now. I guess it's about 12 years old, up north near Thornwood. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful building. He had input from, and I think this is a good background to show how this kind of evolved. He had input from people getting services there into the architecture planning of the building. And out of that, he got the idea to have a gallery there. It's a beautiful building, and up on the first floor, above the ground floor, they actually had a waterfall.
Wow.
It's incredible. And that was a suggestion by the self-advocate group of folks with developmental disabilities that they wanted water to be kind of a theme in the building. And from that grew the idea of a gallery. And so he asked me to head up a committee to develop that gallery. And it kind of floated along for a long time because I did other stuff for them, other services. And then finally, we kind of got serious about it about 5 years in. And I had everything that had been developed art-wise digitized so we could reproduce it in museum quality pieces and framing them professionally. And so we developed that out as something to take out into the community. That was my idea. And I think the last year I was there, we had something like 18 exhibits around Westchester.
Wow.
In banks, libraries, businesses, coffee shops, you name it. So we kind of outgrew the whole idea, I'm not with them anymore. I moved on to other things.
Yeah.
But what I took away from it was this advocacy. So it kind of grew. I didn't start out, I wasn't born being an advocate for this kind of art. And it varies quite a bit. The way it develops is that because of the need to deal with people in groups and these kind of services, art is done in a group, but you always find people who have a special talent or interest. And so that's what, as an advocate, I've begun to focus on is not to do it in groups, because that's what they do, but to look at what some of the better pieces are and put together an exhibit that introduces this art and the individuals who do the art rather than a group. To me, that's very, very important. So that's how my advocacy has developed. So one of the things I did out of that is I set up the Fund for Artists with Disabilities through the Westchester Community Foundation. I seeded that. That has to develop.
Yeah.
Because it kind of sits there. And after I did it, I realized I'm an activist. I have to have some action to make things happen.
Well, let me just.
Am I going on too long?
Yeah, no. I just want to let my listener know that they should, if you want some examples of some of the beautiful art that is created by these clients of Arc of Westchester, beautiful, abstract, geometric. There's some figural, but not as much. Just use of color and shapes, really beautiful. Go to arcwestchester.org and go to the gallery page. I started to wonder if, and maybe you can answer this, is this a new thing where kind of empowering people with developmental disabilities to create art, to put art supplies into people's hands? Is this a new idea, or is it new because we're exposing the rest of the world to the art that these people can create?
It's not new at all. For this reason, it grows out of the mission to improve the quality of life of persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That's where it comes from, and which is a wonderful mission.
Absolutely.
And so as I said, it's done in groups, but you also begin to identify people who have a special talent. And what is new is putting it out there as an art that comes from people who have talent that you ordinarily wouldn't recognize. That's what's relatively new about it. And there are several agencies or nonprofits, I guess, around the country who do this. ARC is one of them. The most advanced one that I've visited in San Francisco is called Creativity Explored. They're over the moon. They're incredible. They have a full studio with full-time teachers, and people come from all over the city. It's not just one. They draw from a lot of different organizations and private families. They come there every day and work. They have, besides using easels and paints and so forth, they have a whole battery of computers to do computer art, for example. They do sculpture. And the woman who founded it was very smart. She was able to get the state of California to understand that this was vocational training. I'm not sure he could pull that off in New York, but that's how they got that started. So, and there's like another one in Texas. There's another one in California. There's one in upstate New York that it's very advanced. But that's kind of leading edge. You don't find that everywhere. Another local one is IAHD, which is based in Tarrytown, New York, and has services in the Bronx. They went the extra mile and hired a young artist who actually, we'll get into it later, but he did the cover for my book that just came out, Johnny Matai, and he has developed an incredible program there. And they deal with folks who are developmentally disabled.
I wonder with, looking at the art that that is, visible on the Arc Westchester site, I do wonder if we're missing something. Those of us who are not in contact with this population, that we disregard or play down the different talents that these people may have. was really struck by some of them as just being very sophisticated and unique in a way.
Well, I can tell you one example of what's very unique. There's one artist there at Arc Westchester by the name of John Israel. John Israel is now in his late 60s, I think. When he was a young boy, his mother was an artist. John has never spoken a word in his life.
Wow.
And his mother passed away. So many years later, he was encouraged, or he kind of came upon the idea of doing art. And he uses the same color spectrum that his mom used. And he has become, there's one piece there that everybody loves. It's a fish that he did that is an incredible piece of art. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but whenever anybody brings this up, I always think of John Israel, and I still get goosebumps when I think about it. The other part of this that no one seems to not no one, but most people don't recognize is that as individuals, beginning to develop a talent gives them confidence.
Sure.
And I know several examples, having worked with ARC that long, of individuals who developed their art, who then got the confidence to go out and get a job.
Wow.
The ARC Westchester, like many of these organizations, have job programs. And I saw that happen. One individual who does a lot of line drawing, a young man, was very, very shy, and we stumbled upon his art, and he wouldn't even show up. He'd come to like at the last minute before the office closed in a hoodie and kind of look around. And eventually he kind of came out and became an incredible artist and out there and got a job.
Wow.
So that's another part of it that I think rides along with the mission of these kinds of organizations that provides these kind of services.
Well, I think for the rest of us, there's also something about art that brings out a different part of us that we find was hidden or disregarded as unimportant at some point, and gets another part of your brain working.
Yes.
And which kind of leads us into your main focus now, I take it, now that you're semi-retired from fundraising, from consulting, is your poetry.
That's a great lead-in.
Yeah.
You're a real pro. That's great.
So
I love it.
Well, so tell me, I guess I knew you as we've had some interactions over the years as we've been in the same kind of fundraising circles.
Yes.
And then I was really surprised to see that you had published a book of poetry about 6-7 years ago.
Yes, 6 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm like, wow, I didn't know this about Rob. But it turns out it's been something you've been doing all along.
Yes, that was self-published. As I said earlier, my friend Patrick Samway, the priest, said to me, he and I went to school together, like, it's about time you did a book.
Oh.
So I thought, okay, the church has spoken. So I did this with somebody you may know, Andrew Dykman, who has a printing business. They deal a lot with nonprofits, and he's a trained artist himself, and he did a great job putting that out. But I gave that away to friends and people I knew and family. I didn't. It wasn't published by a publisher, and that's not considered, as advanced as having a publisher. That still exists. So, but I wrote my first poem when I was in the third grade. I still remember. I don't remember it anymore, but I remember I said that my dog Spot was stung, S-T-O-N-G, by a bee. And my mother kept it. I have it somewhere. and then I wrote in high school. But it was when I was in college, I had two professors that really got me very interested to be serious about poetry. And the one who really brought me along was an expert in Joyce, and was really very knowledgeable about poetry. And I would write things, and he would say, "Well, that's compared to so and so," And I began to think, well, maybe I have something here. And it's always been. I've never been prolific. It's always been something. It's almost like writing music. That something occurs to me, or insight, or whatever it is, and it grabs hold of me, and I have to do it and finish it until I feel like it's done. And the rent could be due and 10 people calling me, but I don't pay any attention until it's done. It's almost like an addiction, for a temporary addiction. So from that time on, I've always written poetry with the kind of process that I just described, but I kept it all. And then, I was able to go from writing longhand to, because I bridged the old days into computers.
Yep.
And then started writing on a computer and keeping all of it. So that's how that. And then I've been involved in the arts there's kind of a underlying theme in my careers of being involved in some way in the arts. I was in public television for 15 years. I produced with one of the original directors in television. His name was Paul Nickel. He wasn't as well known, but he was my mentor in producing television. We did 5 or 6 dramas, like The Night of January 16th, Line in Winter. I can't remember all of them. I worked with a group that wanted to produce documentaries on what was then known as VH tape, which was not accepted by broadcasters. And we were able to convince the engineers who worked for me that we could do that. And then when I left North Carolina, I was asked by one of my brothers to come up to Frederick, Maryland, where I grew up, that the Arts Council had taken over one of the old movie theaters and turned it into performing arts and totally blew it. They asked me to come in and save them. So in a way, that's one of the ways I got into fundraising.
Right. So let me ask you, your poetry life involves things like giving readings, right?
Yes.
And getting involved, is there a group of poetry writers or poets in the community that comes together? Is that one way that you are connecting with other people in writing poetry?
It's very unorganized. The pandemic actually has been helpful. I started a relationship with the Dobbs Ferry Library where I live, and I was planning to do right before the pandemic a gallery exhibit through Riverside Arts, and that fell through, of course. But then through the library, I decided, let's do a poetry reading. So 6 or 7 of us did a poetry reading by Zoom, and we've all kept in touch. So, and then someone will get an idea to do this, and we'll set up a poetry reading. But it's not that organized. One of the most organized things is a program at what's now known as Hudson Valley MoCA.
The Contemporary Arts,
Peekskill.
Yes, in Peekskill, New York.
Yeah, it's a big gallery owned by husband and wife, the Strausses. So they hired a woman who's now become a very good friend of mine, Mara Mills, to start about 15 years ago a program called Writing the Walls. So they'll put up an exhibit. This is very extreme art. I mean, it's contemporary and out there art that they put together. A lot of it's their own collection. So what happens is they'll put it up and they'll invite poets to come in and write a poem about one of the art pieces. And I got involved with that about 5 years ago, and the public is invited, but what happens is you get about 20 people who write poetry.
Right.
It's gotten so big that they've had to make some accommodations for the number of people that come and we all read. So
you have 20 people reading their poetry.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. It's really exciting for people who write poetry. So that's one of the best things in this area, I think, and then Mara did writing off the walls during the pandemic and she has a producer. They do extremely good programs. And we did one that was just online that you could access. So that's one of the areas that I think I'd like to see develop more. But in terms of organizations, well, there's one other one. I just thought of this one that I've been involved with is there's a young man whose name is Zork. That's his go-by.
Okay.
And it's Zork Allen. He is been a national participant in poetry slams. And he started one at White Plains Library. He's been doing this for a number of years, and I'm not sure how long, at least 5 years that I know of. And he runs poetry slams, and at the same time, he'll have open mic. And that's been very successful. And one of the most moving things about those is that young people, let's say from Children's Village, will come and participate. There's like a diversity that you would not believe. Mm-hmm. And that was interrupted by the pandemic, but I'm sure it'll come back again. And there's the Blue Door. I'm just thinking of these now. The one in Yonkers that I actually don't know much about, but I know that they do open mic. And that's what will pop up from time to time, an open mic kind of situation here and there. So there's this kind of undercurrent of poetry that goes on all the time, but there's no one big organization that controls it.
That's so interesting. So, so this puts you in touch with people that you would not otherwise come across in your daily life.
That's right.
But what is that like?
Well, it's there's kind of a natural connection. There's also competition. Mm-hmm. It's like people looking over the shoulder of other people, like, well, what are you doing? Did you get published or did you get an award? Blah blah blah. But everybody is always very positive about and proud of what other people have done. But there is a little undercurrent of competition, of course, and there should be. I mean, it keeps you on your toes.
I've asked you to read a poem, and I'm wondering if you have it
Sure.
ready. I would love to share with my listener. I'd like this one in particular. Maybe you want to just kind of set it up for us, because I think you placed it in your boyhood experiences. Sure.
It's one of my favorites, as I mentioned to you earlier. It's called The Wild Boys of Schoolhouse Road by Robert Edward Miss. I always have to put my name in there. It's just like doing that. But I'll give you the background. In Frederick, Maryland, where I grew up, on my father's side of the family, there were cousins I had never met. One day, my father decided for us to go see one of his uncles that we rarely saw. And he lived out in the country down a dirt road called Schoolhouse Road. And I met three cousins I never even knew I had. And it was at a farmhouse. And so we started, kind of interacting with each other and decided to have a race. And that's what this is about. I'm not going to tell you what the finale of it is, but it's called The Wild Boys of Schoolhouse Road. And they were wild. Okay. Three overalled cousins I had never met stood with arms folded. Politely, they challenged me to a race across the open field. How dare they, me, who had commanded expeditionary forces of lead soldiers, managed fleets of cast iron trucks, the province of an only child. As they stared at me, an electric shiver triggered my jump out front before they could take off. Never before had I felt such acceleration. Never before had I sucked wind so hard my stomach hurt. The veins in my neck were throbbing as I kept the lead, but they were gaining on me. We raced across corn stubble to a crooked creek, gouging through the topsoil. Those three scruffians passed me and stopped dead. With iridescent snot hanging from his nose, one cousin was pointing to the creek. I thought he saw a snake, a big chub, or maybe a muskrat. No, it was the clay bottom laid out in sweeping layers of muted rainbow colors. As if respectfully showing a visitor from the Orient, they proudly stood there, letting me marvel at the striations of copper, silver, pale green, and coral. We walked quietly back to the farmhouse, united somehow by the beauty of what we saw. Thanks.
Oh, I love that. I could absolutely see that creek bed with all the colors, but I could also feel the acceleration of the race and all of that. That was really wonderful, Rob. Thanks.
Yeah, we were boys.
Yeah.
By the way, I was an only child for only 8 years. I had three brothers after
that. There's been a lot in the news recently about longevity. There's a new book out by Stephen Johnson called Extra Life, which basically lays out the case for, we all have been given in the 20th century because of medical advancements and public health advancements. We've been given an extra life. And I wonder what your reflections are. I see your poetry kind of taking you into a place that is a good place for you to be. But I'm wondering if you have any ideas or reflections on what it's like to be actively involved in a field like poetry that's creative and engages your mind and also keeps you socially engaged as well.
Well, I think engaged obviously is the right word. And I've seen other people who, lawyers and doctors in particular, I don't want to pick on them, but that's what I've noticed, who are consumed by their careers. And when it's over, they don't know what to do. I've seen a number of people I've known over the years like that. So engagement is very important, is to go for what really excites you, gives you joy. And it should be a balance. I trained in the classics in college. It's always about balance in classical literature. But it's true. My own case, I've been very active physically. I've run 5 marathons. I still run. I'm 83 years old. People say, "You still run? What's wrong with you?" But I think having a general goal, coming to an understanding of why are you here, It occurred to me many years ago that I'm here to help other people on their path. It might sound presumptuous, but that's what I came to. So you have to have a kind of a general goal and have faith in taking the small steps towards it. So that's faith. You have to have fun. If it's not fun, why do it? And I don't mean there's no drudgery, but I mean to have a sense of satisfaction. That's what joy is all about. And then be patient with yourself. I know I'm giving a lot of advice here, but and I think that's hope. Be patient with yourself, because I hope that you're going to enjoy what you're doing, and there's going to be some good results as an outcome. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but that's...
Yeah, and I think that even takes care of, the 3 pieces of advice I ask from my guests. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
I'd like to read another poem.
Oh, well, great. That's wonderful.
It's one of my favorites, and it has to do when I lived in North Carolina, out in the country, right outside of Chapel Hill, in an old farmhouse that went back to the original settlers of North Carolina, who received their parcel of land from Lord Grenville. And I had a quarter of a mile long dirt driveway to the house. And I'd go out there at night and take a walk, and here it is. And I had a very intense job at that time, running a television operation.
Right.
It's called When I Walk at Night Between Nickelodeon Days. When I walk at night towards our old country house, its saffron lamps seem to exhale softly the sweet ether. Pliable leaves underfoot add a distance to the day's rinky-dink patterns. Now, at last, we can let go. The world won't roll away and run bumpity-bump crash into a hedgerow. Tonight, star in the oaks, breeze through the pines, the chiffon presence of shadbush and quince. Breathe in, slowly breathe out. Yes, we'll have to put another nickel in, but that's tomorrow. That's one of my favorites.
Oh, that's nice. Very nice. Thanks for that, Rob. And you're expecting that your next book is going to be published very soon, right? You're expecting delivery of that soon. Do you want to just give us the name and tell folks where to get it? Oh, okay.
It's called Prospero's Glove. That's the lead poem. It's 64 poems published by Kelsey Books. So you can get it. It's on Amazon. So it's Prospero's Glove by Robert Edward Miss. And you can also get it on the catalog of Kelsey Books. That's Kelsay Books. So it's here.
Fantastic.
And yes.
So I've
had a really good time talking to you.
This was great. That's your latest version is your new book, and you continue with your poetry and your very interesting advocacy for artists with developmental disabilities, and it's very, very impressive.
We're planning a new gallery exhibit, probably in Peekskill, once everything opens up.
Oh, fantastic. I'll be sure. Let me know when the opening is.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate it.
Great pleasure. I appreciate it.
Great.
Too.
Thanks, Rob Miss.